What's up, folks? It's Brian Juster, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy, recent $50,000 UFC DFS winner, and we're back again this week to give you some picks and lineup advice, both FanDuel and DraftKings, for tonight's UFC DFS slate. Woodley and Burns, UFC Apex, and what you see on screen here is our UFC Occupy Model, MMA Occupy Model on OccupyFantasy.com, and we're going to use this to talk about the slate and let you know some strategies that you should use when you're making your lineups tonight. So if you like what we do, first of all, please click that subscribe button below. That way you make sure you get all of our latest videos. And if you really like this video, give us a thumbs up. Let us know. And if you have questions about the slate, DFS, Occupy Fantasy in general, comment below and we'll certainly get back to you when we can. So again, this is our Occupy model. Ranks fighters on more than 50 different metrics to give you a hint at their tournament upside. This is not ranked for low risk contests. These numbers are for high risk contests only, and the best way to describe it is a combination of likelihood to win plus likelihood to score well when they do win. So that combination is the scoring system, really what our OF index, our primary metric, tries to account for. So again, this is on OccupyFantasy.com in the Occupy model link, and it is all free until major sports return in North America. So a couple things to think about for this slate, both FanDuel and DraftKings. And the first thing that we should touch on is similar to the Chikadze situation from the last UFC slate. We have another fighter who was scheduled to be an underdog. His opponent dropped out. They brought in a replacement fighter, and now this super cheap guy is a huge favorite and going to be extremely popular in all contest types. And that guy for this slate is Daniel Rodriguez, originally scheduled to fight Kevin Holland. Now they've brought in Gabriel Green, and as you'll notice, Rodriguez is a minus 335 favorite, huge favorite to win, second biggest favorite on the slate, but most importantly, 73% knockout chance. And you'll notice that even though it's a 3-round fight, the projected rounds for this fight is just under 1.5. So very likely we get a first round knockout here. So, and the craziest thing about it is because of the original fight, Rodriguez is $7,300 on DraftKings, $13 on FanDuel, one of the cheapest fighters on both sites. So what do we do with him? Low risk lineups, you get him in, you don't worry about it. Easy. High risk contest, because of the high knockout percentage, because of his low salary, it's tough not to use him. I mean, we expect him to be 50, 60, 70% owned in most high risk lineups. And, so you have to make a decision. If you're making 20 lineups or less, you probably have to use Rodriguez in most of your lineups. The issue is that because he's so highly owned and because he's so cheap, it forces your lineup to look very similar to everyone else's lineups. And that's never a good thing for high risk contests. So what you'll have to do is either leave some salary on the table, use more underdogs with Rodriguez, or use some of the lower owned high price fighters to differentiate yourself. And we'll try to hit on those here in the next couple of minutes. The other approach here, and I think it's worth doing if you're making 10 or more lineups. If you're making less than 10 lineups, it probably doesn't make a ton of sense. But it is using Gabriel Green. Now, he's the second worst ranked fighter on the slate according to our model. However, as a plus 250 underdog, he still has, roughly a 20% chance of winning, give or take a few percent based on the betting markets. Now, if you watch UFC, if you've studied it, you may think that there's no way this guy has a chance of winning, but betting markets indicate that there is a chance. A lot of times we put too much weight on what we think is actually going to happen instead of letting probabilities dictate what we do. And Gabe Green at 20% probability, unless something crazy happens, if he wins, he's probably going to score enough points to be in the winning DraftKings or FanDuel lineup, especially if it allows you to fit in other high-priced fighters. But his ownership's only going to be 5, maybe 10% because of his opponent's popularity. So it's worth having Green in a couple of lineups, even one lineup if you're playing 10, for the massive leverage and chaos if he does pull off the 20% upset. So just something to think about when you're making your high-risk lineups. The next thing to touch on is the main event fight, the 5-rounder. That's Tyron Woodley versus Gilbert Burns. And the thing is here is that Woodley has a really high KO percentage, relatively high, 48%. Burns down at 35%. And the 5-round fights are always pretty popular for good reason. You get 2 more rounds than the other fight. That makes a ton of sense, right? The issue with this fight is that it should be pretty low volume, especially from Woodley's side. So if Woodley doesn't get a knockout early, even if it goes 5 rounds, there's a good chance that at his price tag, he doesn't score enough FanDuel or DraftKings points to put in the winning lineup, especially when we have some of these other fighters on the slate that can score really well. So what you want to do is, if you're playing the Woodley Burns fight, you're either playing Woodley for a knockout early and hope it happens, but given his likely ownership and what the knockout percentage chance are of a first or second round knockout, you might want to go a little lower than 40%. 2 out of every 5 lineups for Woodley. Burns, on the other hand, still only a plus 149 underdog, so he's not a huge underdog. And he's in the top half of the model in the 5-round fight, which is normally a good sign for an underdog in their likelihood of being in the top lineup if they pull off the upset. So Burns, even though he only has a 35% knockout chance, there's a pretty good chance that when he wins at his price tag 7,400, that he'll be in the lineup, in the best lineup. And I think it's worth having maybe not equal exposure to both Woodley and Burns, but having a good amount of Burns too to cover yourself. But it's not a fight by any means, because if you look at the projected rounds, 4.4, even though it's a 5-round fight, betting markets are suggesting that this goes 4 or 5 rounds unless there's an early knockout. So if that happens, good chance Woodley's not going to be in the best lineup, and Burns would have to still pull off the upset. So definitely some situations where this fight doesn't have a quick knockout, and the winner is not in the winning tournament lineup by the end of the night. So again, something to think about. Another factor to think about are these low volume fights where, especially if you're making 5, 10, even 20 lineups, where you can say, look, unless something crazy happens, there isn't going to be a ton of fantasy scoring here, and we can ignore those fights and focus on the fights that have more fantasy friendly environments. 3 fights stick out to me, to our model, for fights you should avoid unless you're playing a ton of lineups or you're looking for super chaos. The first fight is this Augusto Sakai fight against Ivanov, and you'll see as the favorite, Sakai doesn't even rank in the top half of the model. His opponent, Ivanov, near the bottom. A great way to tell a low volume fight using our model is to just look to see where both fighters rank. If both are in the bottom, that means even if they win, they're not likely to be high scoring. The only way that this is going to happen is with a knockout, first round knockout, second round knockout. So you look at their KO percents, and that should be a rough indicator of how often you should use them. But again, I think if you're playing 10 lineups or less, you should probably avoid these fights. The only one of the 3 fights that I'm about to discuss, the only one that I would potentially use is Sakai, based on his potential knockout usage, knockout potential. The other fight is Morales and Gutierrez. Both guys are in the bottom third of the model. If you look, very low projected strikeout or knockout, strikeout, got KBO on the mind. Knockout potential, 28 and 18% respectively. Fight expected to go 3 rounds, 2.74 rounds. Neither one looks very appealing. You can definitely avoid this fight unless you're making a ton of lineups. And finally, is this Shevchenko fight. Again, 2 fighters in the bottom half of the model, 19% and 16% knockout chances, low volume fights, and at 8,500 seems really hard to use Shevchenko. And then her opponent, even if she wins, which doesn't look likely given the betting market movements, 25-cent move against her, still likely to go 3 rounds. And again, 5 lineups or less, 10 lineups or less, 1 lineup, even 20 lineups or less, probably a fight that you can avoid and focus on combinations of these other heavy potential fights. All right, before we get out of here, let's talk about one of those heavy potential fights, and that's Spike Carlisle, Billy Quarantillo. You look at it, our model loves Carlisle. It liked Hernandez on the last slate. Hernandez was knocked out in about 6 seconds. But again, remember, the model is used to project likelihood to win, and if they win, likelihood to be in the winning lineup. And based on that, it loves Carlisle. And it's nice to see the money line move, 28 cents in Carlisle's favor. So not only do we have the model telling us, we have betting markets telling us too that Carlisle is more likely to win. But you'll see that him and Quarantillo, again, names, don't watch the UFC. Both guys have high knockout percentages. Carlisle 44%, Quarantillo 39%. So if either one of these guys win, they're probably going to be in the winning lineup. Our model loves Carlisle more, especially as an underdog. To see an underdog at the top of the model, high OF index, great money line move, high knockout percentage. A lot of the stars are aligning for Carlisle. Now, this isn't guaranteeing he's winning. He's still an underdog. Betting markets still say, despite moving towards him, still less than 50% chance to win. But we think it, based on his projected ownership, based on his huge upside, we think it's a great play. You should have a good amount of your lineups. And if you don't use him, you should be using Quarantillo in the rest of your lineups. This fight looks really, really poised for high fantasy scoring. One other fight looks like that too, by the way. And it's Kenny and Smoka. Two guys in the top third of the model. Even, I guess, to an extent, Tim Elliott and Brandon Royval. So, again, that's how you use the model to create winning lineups. The key here is if you're playing tournaments, you're playing high-risk contests, you're playing satellites, you can only use a certain amount of high-owned fighters, right? So fighters like, who we haven't discussed, but Mackenzie Dern, who's minus 400, 69% knockout chance, going to be one of the most popular after Rodriguez. So if you use Rodriguez and Dern together, you have to get creative with the rest of your lineup because you already have a very, very popular start to your 6-man lineup. All right, that'll do it for this video. We're going to go live on Twitch at 4:30 p.m. Eastern, and that's for Twitch subscribers only. Remember, our Twitch subscribers also get access to our Discord channel where we're talking about all different kinds of sports. We'll put that link in the description below. So go watch that video live at 4:30. Get your questions answered there. If you miss it, you can always watch the replay on twitch.tv/Occupy Fantasy. And again, this slate starts at 6 p.m. tonight, but the model will continue to be updated automatically as betting odds change if any news changes throughout the course of the day. Again, you can find the model at occupyfantasy.com under the Occupy Model link in the main menu. So again, I'm Brian Jester for Occupy Fantasy. We appreciate you listening, and good luck.